The story of Julius Caesar begins not with a king or a conqueror, but with a boy born into a city at war with itself. Rome, in the year 100 BCE, was a republic bursting at its seams. Power shifted between generals and senators, and the old system strained beneath the weight of ambition. Into this restless world came Gaius, Julius Caesar, a child of the patrician Iuli family, noble by name, but no longer wealthy or politically dominant. His family claimed descent from Venus through her son Aeneas, a connection whispered like prophecy. Rome, at this time, was ruled by the Senate, a body of aristocrats who claimed to defend the Republic. As a young boy, Caesar watched the rise of Gaius Marius, a brilliant general and reformer who happened to be married to his aunt Julia. Marius stood for the populares, the faction that sought power through the people. Opposing him was Lucius Cornelius Sulla, the ruthless leader of the Optimates, who defended the old Senate's power. These two men, Marius and Sulla, would tear Rome apart, and young Caesar would be caught in their storm. In a city where words could bring down armies, Caesar mastered the tongue before the sword. Because of his connection to Marius, Caesar was seen as an enemy by Sulla's faction. When Sulla seized power in a bloody civil war, he unleashed purges against anyone loyal to Marius. Thousands were killed. His family estate was seized, his title stripped, a bounty placed on his head. He hid in the countryside, moving from house to house, evading Sulla's assassins. Sulla, reluctantly, spared him, but warned his allies with chilling words. "In this boy, I see many a Marius." It was a prophecy of fear. Sulla saw in Caesar the same dangerous ambition that once threatened the Republic. Having escaped death, Caesar understood two truths. Rome was not ruled by law, but by power, and he would need to become strong, stronger than those who hunted him. Far from Rome, on foreign soil, he proved himself not just brave, but brilliant. In one battle, he rescued a fellow soldier while under heavy attack, earning the civic crown, one of Rome's highest honors. He carried himself not as a refugee of politics, but as a man destined to lead. In those years, he also learned how soldiers bled, how cities fell, and how loyalty was forged in war. He became not only a survivor, but a commander. When Sulla died, Caesar returned to Rome. The Republic was still fractured, but the terror that once haunted him had faded. He was a decorated officer, young, intelligent, and dangerous. He began climbing the political ladder with careful precision. He restored his family's name, reclaimed property, and re-entered public life. But Caesar did not just want to blend in with the Senate. He wanted to reshape it. To gain influence, he pursued powerful alliances. One of his first steps was to marry into wealth. His marriage to Cornelia Sanilla, daughter of a leading populist, tied him even more deeply to the populares faction. He was young, charming, and bold. Unlike many nobles, Caesar wasn't afraid to walk among the people, shake their hands, and speak in their language. His speeches echoed in the forum, fiery and elegant. He became a rising star of Roman politics. But Caesar's ambition was not without risk. His loyalty to populares' ideals put him at odds with the conservative Senate. Again, he faced threats and political enemies who saw in him another Marius waiting to rise. He charmed enemies, outmaneuvered rivals, and built alliances piece by piece. His career took a turn when he became a priest of Jupiter, a prestigious position meant to keep him tied to religion, not politics. When a powerful military campaign called for volunteers, Caesar gave up the priesthood and went to war, once again proving that ambition was stronger than tradition. During a journey to study in Asia Minor, pirates captured Caesar. When the pirates demanded ransom, he laughed, saying they had demanded too little for a man of his importance. While in captivity, he joked, read poetry, and promised the pirates he would one day hunt them down. After his ransom was paid and he was freed, Caesar gathered ships, returned to the island, and captured the pirates. True to his word, he had them executed. Back in Rome, his fame grew. The story of the young noble who mocked his captors and killed them afterwards spread like wildfire. Caesar climbed the political ladder steadily, taking minor offices and turning them into stages for his ambition. But behind the smiles and spectacles, he built networks of loyalty and influence. As his power grew, he aligned himself with Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, Pompey the Great, and Marcus Licinius Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome. Together, they would one day form a political alliance that shook the Republic. But in these early days, it was only the seed of ambition. Senators grew richer while the poor starved. Veterans were abandoned after war. Corruption spread through every corner of the government. He understood what few others did. The Republic was dying from within, and someone bold enough could take it. His early campaigns as a military commander taught him discipline and leadership. He began to believe that perhaps destiny truly favored him. Not yet emperor, not yet dictator, but the shadow of his future had begun to stretch across the city. He had learned to smile at enemies while planning their defeat. In the streets, whispers began to follow him. The Senate watched him closely, aware that power like his was not built for compromise. He wanted to lead Rome, not through permission, but through inevitability. Wars in Gaul and unrest across the provinces created opportunities for ambitious men. And Caesar was nothing if not ambitious. His political alliances grew stronger. His popularity with the common people soared. His enemies multiplied in the shadows. By the late 60s BCE, he had become Praetor Aeschynia Magister. The boy who once ran from assassins now stood at the gates of power to make it stronger, as he saw it with him at its center. Yet history teaches that when ambition burns too brightly, the world is set aflame. Garlands hung from columns. Caesar smiled, not because of the honor, but because he could already see the next step. The consulship. Command of an army. A future carved in blood and marble. Caesar walked beneath them, cloaks swirling behind him, already aware that his destiny was tied to the city's fate. And into those cracks, Caesar began to slip like water, shaping the stone itself. He had not yet worn a crown, but the world had started to turn in his direction. And above it all, the shadow of power, growing, reaching, whispering his name. The city of Rome was a beast, hungry, ambitious, and never satisfied. By the time Julius Caesar returned from his early ventures, it had changed, grown even more restless. The Senate trembled beneath factions. The Republic was a fragile masterpiece of power, balanced on a knife's edge. And Caesar, with a sharpened mind and unmatched charisma, had learned how to move through its corridors like a predator sensing weakness. Caesar was no longer just a clever, young politician. He was a rising star with allies, debts, and dangerous ambitions. He knew he needed power that reached beyond the Senate floor. Power that came not from speeches alone, but from armies. Armies loyal, not to Rome, but to him. Opportunity arrived through Gaul. A vast, untamed land beyond the Alps, rich in resources, tribes, and military glory. Rome had long struggled to tame its wild tribes. But Caesar saw what others didn't. Gaul wasn't a graveyard for legions. It was a stage on which a man could become a legend. In 58 BC, Caesar took command of the Roman legions and marched north. His soldiers, rough and loyal, followed him into a land that even Rome feared. He greeted them not as distant commander, but as one of their own. He fought beside them, bled with them, and celebrated victories with them. The Gallic tribes underestimated him. They saw a Roman consul leading his army into a trap. But Caesar was no ordinary general. His campaigns were brutal, strategic, and brilliant. He crushed resistance with terrifying speed, turning village after village into Roman territory. The first great confrontation came with the Helvetii tribe. A massive migration threatened Roman borders, and Caesar acted swiftly. He intercepted them with surgical precision, cutting off their supply lines, forcing them into open battle. The battle was fierce. The Helvetii fought like wolves, desperate and proud. But Caesar's legions were disciplined machines, their shields locking into a wall, their short swords thrusting with deadly rhythm. When the dust cleared, tens of thousands lay dead or captured. Caesar did not just defeat them, he annihilated their will to resist. The tribes of Gaul began to whisper his name in fear. But Gaul was not conquered so easily. It was a land of countless tribes, each with their own leaders, alliances, and ambitions. Caesar realized that brute force alone wouldn't win Gaul. He began to weave diplomacy with brutality, rewarding some, destroying others. He forged alliances with weaker tribes, promising protection in exchange for loyalty. He crushed those who defied him, leaving smoldering ruins as warnings. The Roman eagle flew further north than it ever had before. The Senate back in Rome began to watch him closely. Some admired his genius. Others feared it. A victorious general was dangerous. A victorious Caesar, even more so. News of his conquests spread like wildfire. Gaul was being subdued at a pace Rome had never imagined. Caesar's reports, carefully crafted and sent back home, painted him as the savior of Rome's borders. But beneath the polished words were rivers of blood. Entire tribes disappeared. Villages were burned. The Roman machine under Caesar's command was relentless. One of his greatest challenges came from the powerful Gallic leader Vercingetorix. Unlike the others, this man understood strategy. He united the tribes in a massive revolt, determined to drive the Romans out once and for all. Vercingetorix used scorched earth tactics, burning fields, denying Caesar's army's supplies, forcing the Romans into difficult terrain. It was the most dangerous campaign Caesar had ever faced. But Caesar thrived in impossible situations. At Alesia, he surrounded the Gallic stronghold with massive fortifications, trapping Vercingetorix inside. And when Gallic reinforcements arrived to break the siege, Caesar did something legendary. He built another wall, facing outward. The Romans were now trapped between two armies, one inside the fortress, one outside. But Caesar's engineering and discipline turned the siege into a masterpiece of military strategy. The Gauls attacked with fury. Thousands clashed. The night sky burned with fire. The earth trembled with the weight of armies. But Caesar's lines held. At dawn, Vercingetorix surrendered. Rome had crushed Gaul. Julius Caesar had become the greatest general of his time. His soldiers adored him. They followed him not because they were ordered to, but because they believed in him. He gave them victory, loot, and glory. He made them part of something larger. But with every victory, Caesar's shadow grew longer over Rome. The Senate felt it. Pompey the Great felt it. Even the people who loved him began to whisper, "No one man should have such power." In Rome, alliances shifted like sand. Caesar had once been part of the first triumvirate, an alliance with Pompey and Marcus Licinius Crassus. But power is a fragile bond. Crassus was dead. Pompey had grown closer to the Senate. Caesar, victorious in Gaul, now stood apart, a lion no cage could hold. Letters from the Senate demanded he disband his army and return to Rome as a private citizen. But they knew what that really meant. To return without power was to be devoured by his enemies. Caesar read their demands in silence, standing in his tent with maps of conquered Gaul spread before him. Outside, the campfires of his legions burned bright. Rome wanted him humbled. Caesar had no intention of bowing. His soldiers swore loyalty to him, not the Senate. They had bled with him, and they would follow him anywhere. Caesar knew then that the next step would define his destiny and the future of Rome. He could obey the Senate and lose everything. Or he could defy them and seize it all. And in his mind, the choice was already made. As winter fell over Gaul, the Roman Republic trembled, not from barbarian invasion, but from the ambition of one man who had conquered more than any before him. Julius Caesar was returning to Rome, not as a servant of the Republic, but as its greatest threat. The cold wind of winter swept through Caesar's Gallic camp as he stood before a map of Rome, his hands resting on the edges of the table like a general contemplating the gods. His victories had shaken the known world, but now came a greater battle, not against foreign tribes, but against his own republic. The Senate had issued its final ultimatum. Caesar was to disband his legions and return to Rome as an ordinary citizen. It was a command that sounded lawful, but it was a death sentence in disguise. His enemies in the Senate, especially those loyal to Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, would devour him the moment he stepped foot inside the city without his army. 4 days, Caesar paced the halls of his command tent, weighing the fate of Rome and his own destiny. His officers waited, tense and silent, knowing their general's next decision could either preserve the Republic or plunge it into civil war. Caesar understood the cost. To obey would mean humiliation, possibly execution. To resist meant war against the very state he once served. There was no middle ground. Outside, thousands of legionaries, hardened men who had followed him through the brutal campaigns in Gaul, stood ready. Their loyalty to Caesar was absolute. They would not hesitate. Pompey, once his ally, had aligned himself with the Senate and taken control of the city's defenses. He boasted that Caesar would never dare march on Rome. He believed the weight of tradition, law, and fear would chain him. But Pompey had never truly understood Caesar. Fear did not bind him. It forged him. In early January of 49 BC, Caesar gathered his closest officers in a small chamber lit only by torches. The air was thick with tension. He spoke not as a politician, but as a commander leading men into the unknown. He told them the truth. Crossing into Italy with his legions would make him an enemy of the Republic. There would be no turning back. Yet, as his voice filled the room, no man objected. They had already made their choice long before that night. They would follow him into the jaws of history. The boundary between Gaul and Italy lay at a small, shallow river, the Rubicon. It was a line that no general was legally allowed to cross with an army. To do so was to declare war on the Senate. On the night of January 10th, Caesar approached the river with the 13th Legion. The moon hung low, pale and silent. His horse pawed the earth, sensing the weight of the moment. Caesar looked down at the water. It was not wide, nor deep. But what it represented was everything. On the other side lay either triumph or ruin. He is said to have paused, reflecting not just on his ambitions but on the fate of Rome itself. And then, with a calm voice, he spoke the words that would echo through history. Alla iactai, isti the die is cast. He spurred his horse forward, crossing the Rubicon. Behind him, thousands of soldiers followed. It was no longer a march. It was a storm. Rome awoke in panic. News of Caesar's crossing spread like wildfire through the city. Senators fled. Noble families packed their treasures and vanished into the night. Pompey had boasted he could stop Caesar, but the moment the legions began their advance, he realized his miscalculation. Caesar was not coming with diplomacy. He was coming with war. Pompey and the Senate's loyalists abandoned Rome without a fight, retreating south to gather their forces. The city, the heart of the Republic, fell into Caesar's hands like ripe fruit. Caesar entered Rome not as a conqueror drunk on blood, but as a man of precision. He restored order. He forbade his soldiers from looting. He presented himself not as a tyrant, but as the savior of Rome from corrupt elites. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. Pompey was regrouping, raising armies across the Republic. The Senate branded Caesar a traitor. Civil war was no longer a distant threat. It had begun. Caesar moved with terrifying speed. He secured the state treasury, gaining control of the financial heart of the Republic. With the gold of Rome in his hands, he could fund his campaigns indefinitely. Then, instead of waiting for Pompey to come to him, he pursued him relentlessly. His legions swept through Italy, driving Pompeian forces before them like dust in the wind. In a matter of weeks, the entire Italian peninsula bowed before Caesar's advance. But Pompey had escaped to Greece, where he gathered massive forces, legions loyal to the Senate, fleets, and foreign allies. Caesar knew that to truly claim power, he would have to face his old ally-turned-rival on the battlefield. Before leaving Italy, Caesar made one of his most daring moves. He marched into Spain to crush Pompey's forces stationed there. His speed stunned the world. He secured the region before Pompey even fully prepared in Greece. Every victory Caesar claimed did more than weaken Pompey. It cemented his image as unstoppable, a man chosen by destiny. His letters to Rome were carefully crafted masterpieces of propaganda. He spoke of peace, of protecting the Republic, while marching legions across continents. To the people, he was a hero. To the Senate, a usurper. Meanwhile, Pompey gathered an army larger than Caesar's. But Caesar had something Pompey lacked: loyalty. His soldiers were veterans, forged through brutal campaigns. They trusted their general completely. In 48 BC, Caesar set sail for Greece. The world held its breath. Two of the greatest men of the Republic were on a collision course. Their confrontation would decide not only who ruled Rome, but whether the Republic itself would survive.
The clash between Caesar and Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus was no longer a matter of politics. It had become a duel of giants. One had the Senate's blessing and vast armies. The other had the loyalty of legions and the momentum of destiny. In the summer of 48 BC, Caesar's forces landed in Greece. Pompey had chosen the battlefield carefully. He had more men, more cavalry, and the support of many senators. He expected Caesar to falter, outnumbered and far from home. But Caesar was a creature of strategy. He moved quickly, securing key positions, cutting supply lines, and turning Pompey's advantages against him. The decisive confrontation came at Battle of Pharsalus. The sun rose over the plain, glinting off Roman armor. Pompey's ranks stretched far and wide, confident of their numbers. Caesar's men stood fewer, but they were hardened killers, veterans who had followed their commander through Gaul and beyond. Pompey planned to overwhelm Caesar with his superior cavalry, but Caesar had anticipated the move. He had hidden a line of infantry behind his horsemen, ready to strike when the time was right. As the battle raged, Pompey's cavalry charged. Caesar's line bent, but did not break. Then, like a trap snapping shut, Caesar's concealed infantry attacked from the flank. Panic spread through Pompey's forces. In a matter of hours, the Senate's great army crumbled. Caesar stood victorious, his men cheering his name as Pompey fled the field in disgrace. It was not just a military victory. It was the death knell of the old republic. The Senate's power had been broken. Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for sanctuary from the young pharaoh. But when Caesar pursued him, he was met with a gruesome gift. Pompey had been assassinated the moment he arrived, a severed head presented to Caesar on the shore. Caesar stared at the lifeless face of the man who had once been his ally, then his rival. It was not triumph, he felt. It was a cold, hollow silence. Pompey had been a pillar of Rome. His death meant Caesar now stood alone at the top. In Egypt, Caesar was drawn into the royal court's deadly intrigues. The throne was contested between Cleopatra, the seventh Philopator, and her brother. The young queen sought Caesar's support to secure her rule. Cleopatra entered his life not as a supplicant, but as a force of nature, intelligent, ambitious, and mesmerizing. She understood power as Caesar did, not as inheritance, but as something to be seized. Together, they forged an alliance. Caesar helped her claim the Egyptian throne. In return, Egypt became a powerful ally and a source of wealth. But their relationship went beyond politics. Cleopatra captivated him. Their nights in Alexandria became legend, whispered in Rome with both fascination and outrage. While Caesar's bond with Cleopatra grew, the fires of civil war still smoldered. Across the Republic, remnants of Pompey's supporters rallied, refusing to accept Caesar's dominance. He marched across the Mediterranean, crushing resistance with terrifying efficiency. In Africa, in Spain, one battlefield after another, Caesar annihilated his enemies. With each victory, his legend grew, and the Senate's influence withered further. But victory had a price. The more power he gathered, the more uneasy the Senate became. They had once feared Pompey as a single man with too much power. Now Caesar held far more than Pompey ever did. In 46 BC, Caesar returned to Rome. The city greeted him with thunderous applause. The streets were filled with flowers, music, and celebrations. He was hailed not merely as a hero, but as a savior. The Senate, humiliated and broken, had no choice but to legitimize his rule. They named him dictator for 10 years. Caesar began reshaping Rome itself. He reformed the calendar, reorganized debts, granted citizenship, and strengthened the state. To the common people, he was a bringer of order and justice. But to the traditional senators, he was a shadow creeping toward monarchy. The Republic had always prided itself on its hatred of kings, and Caesar, whether he admitted it or not, was beginning to look like one. He wore the laurel crown. He sat on a golden chair during public games. He placed his own image on coins. Rome had not seen such acts since the days of kings. Whispers began to spread, with Caesar planning to make himself king. His supporters adored him. They believed only Caesar could bring stability after decades of chaos. But his enemies saw a tyrant in the making. One event fanned these fears into wildfire. During a public festival, Mark Antony offered Caesar a royal diadem, a symbol of kingship. The crowd held its breath. Caesar refused it, but the gesture itself sent a clear message. The crown hovered over Rome. Senators exchanged uneasy glances. Caesar might not have taken the crown that day, but how long would it be before he did? Behind closed doors, conspiracies began to take root. Men who had once served under him began whispering of liberty, of saving the Republic from a single man. Caesar, perhaps blinded by his own power, dismissed these whispers. He believed he was untouchable. After all, who would dare strike at the most powerful man in the world? But power, as Caesar had learned in his youth, breeds both loyalty and fear in Rome had a way of sharpening daggers.
The city of Rome glittered beneath a spring sun in 44 BC. It was a season that should have been filled with peace and celebration. The Republic, once torn apart by war, now thrived under the iron hand of Julius Caesar. Yet, beneath the surface of that apparent calm, a storm brewed. Caesar had become the most powerful man Rome had ever seen. His image appeared on coins, his statues towered in forums, and his words shaped laws before the ink even dried. But too many senators? He no longer resembled a defender of the Republic. He had become something older, something Rome had sworn to destroy forever. A king in everything but name. The title of dictator for life had been granted to him just weeks earlier. It was meant to secure stability. Instead, it terrified the old guard. Rome's proud traditions had always feared one thing above all: tyranny. And in Caesar's golden chair, beneath his laurel crown, they saw the shadow of monarchy rising from its grave. In whispered conversations in dark corners, a group of senators began to plot. Some were driven by ideology, others by ambition, but they were united by a single belief. If Caesar lived, the Republic would die. Among them stood Gaius Cassius Longinus, a bitter enemy of Caesar's growing power, and Marcus Junius Brutus, once a trusted ally and friend. Brutus's involvement gave the plot its soul, for he was known as a man of honor. They did not plan rebellion. They planned a surgical strike, an assassination that would rip Caesar out of Rome like a dagger pulled from flesh. Caesar, despite the warnings swirling around him, ignored the danger. He dismissed the omens, the whispered betrayals, the anxious looks of his friends. He believed the Republic would never dare. Yet Rome itself seemed to sense the coming storm. In the days leading up to the fateful event, soothsayers and augurs spoke of strange signs. One warned Caesar directly, beware the Ides of March. The Ides, March 5th, 10th, dawned bright and clear. Caesar rose in his villa, ready to attend a session of the Senate at the theater of Pompey. He was urged not to go. His wife, Calpurnia, wife of Julius Caesar, begged him to stay home, shaken by bad dreams. But Caesar, ever proud, waved away the fears. What is to be, will be, he said calmly. He dressed in a flowing white toga with a crimson border, the symbol of supreme authority. He stepped into the streets, unaware that every stride brought him closer to his death. In the Senate chamber, the conspirators gathered. They had daggers hidden beneath their robes. Brutus, Cassius, and over 60 senators waited. Their hearts pounded, their resolve hardened. When Caesar entered, the hall fell silent. He greeted them warmly, unaware that these familiar faces had already condemned him. One conspirator approached him with a petition, a distraction. As Caesar tried to read it, another man grabbed his shoulder. It was the signal. The first dagger plunged into his neck. Caesar staggered back, shocked. Then another blade struck. Then another. The Senate chamber exploded into chaos. The sound of sandals scraping marble, robes swirling, steel flashing. Caesar, the conqueror of Gaul, the master of Rome, was trapped not by armies, but by men he once called friends. He tried to fight at first, but the onslaught was relentless. Blood spilled onto the white marble floor, staining it forever with history's betrayal. And then Brutus stepped forward. The man he trusted most. The man he had loved like a son. Caesar looked at him, not with anger, but with heartbreak. Et tu, Brute, he whispered, and in that moment, the weight of the world fell upon him. The final daggers cut the last breath from his body. Julius Caesar collapsed at the base of Pompey's statue, the same man he had defeated to claim Rome. In death, the Republic's most powerful man lay beneath the shadow of its former champion. The conspirators expected cheers, celebrations, and a rebirth of the Republic. But they had misread the soul of Rome. When the people learned of Caesar's assassination, they did not celebrate. They rioted. They screamed. They mourned. Caesar had not been a distant tyrant. He had been their hero. His body was carried through the streets. His bloodstained toga displayed to the masses, the air filled with cries of rage and grief. Mark Antony, his loyal ally, delivered a funeral speech that burned through the city like fire. He showed the wounds, named the traitors, and turned the people against the Senate. Rome erupted into chaos. The conspirators fled or were hunted down. Brutus and Cassius, once convinced they had saved the Republic, became fugitives of their own nation. But Caesar's story did not end with his death. His will revealed something extraordinary. He named his grandnephew, Gaius Octavius, as his heir. The boy would soon rise to become Augustus, the first emperor of Rome. The Republic the conspirators sought to save crumbled beneath the weight of their actions. Civil war returned, fiercer than before. Out of that war, the Roman Empire was born. The Senate's power faded into ceremony. Caesar's vision, whether intended or not, had triumphed beyond the grave. Statues rose in his honor. Temples were built. His name became divine. Caesar was no longer just a man. It became a title carried by emperors for centuries to come. In the end, the daggers that sought to preserve the Republic became the chisels that carved the empire. And Julius Caesar betrayed by friends and murdered beneath the gaze of Pompey's statue, achieved what no mortal before him had: immortality through power, legend, and legacy.